Hi there. I'm going to be discussing the three novels that I read this week. The first one I'm going to be discussing is The Handmaid's Tale. Oops. So the key skills that we would hope that students would take away from The Handmaid's Tale would be to identify and analyze examples of real and not real words. Because there are some unfamiliar words in this book that are not in the English language. So we want to be able to identify what those words are intended to mean. We want them to be able to articulate significant language patterns and to apply knowledge of literary themes to show connections between text-specific examples and larger themes. Another thing we want them to be able to take away is to make connections about the language in the book and examples of official language. Okay, the standards that we're going to be addressing with the reading of the book and the alternative assessment. First, we want students to be able to read a wide range of print and non-print text to build an understanding of texts themselves, cultures of the United States, and cultures around the world. As I mentioned, there's a very different type of society that exists in this book, and readers may not be familiar with it. It's fiction, so we want them to be able to make connections between this kind of alternative society and the world that they live in. We want them to be able to respond to the needs and demands of society in the workplace and for personal fulfillment. Among these texts are fiction, nonfiction, classic, and contemporary works. Students should be able to apply a wide range of strategies to comprehend, interpret, evaluate, and appreciate texts. We want them to be able to draw on prior experiences, their interactions with other readers and writers, their knowledge of word meaning and of other texts, and their word identification strategies, which is going to come into an important part of this because some of the words are very unfamiliar to most readers, and their understanding of textual features. So this is a graphic novel, so textual features are going to be big at play in this book. Students should also be able to adjust their use of spoken, written, and visual language to communicate effectively. And lastly, students will apply knowledge of language structure, language conventions, media techniques, figurative language, and genre to critique, create, and discuss print and non-print text. So as you can see here in this slide, this is an example of a page in the book. Here we have conversation bubbles where the ladies are talking, and then that's mixed with regular text that describes the scene or the plot in the story. Another interesting aspect of this book was the bright frocks that the girls are wearing, in contrast to the pastel backgrounds that are used for scenery and kind of the grayscale background of the areas that are not so in focus. We want readers to be able to see that there's that challenge between the two entities in the book. The author also was challenged greatly by this graphic novel because The Handmaid's Tale was also made for television production. So she was challenged because readers can sometimes have a preconceived idea of what characters look like and how they should act, what their body language is like. And she had to overcome all of that to kind of go along with how TV portrayed them, but also to kind of keep her own version of the story. As an alternative assessment, we could have students redesign the book cover. Here we have an original artwork portrait of one of the main characters, and it's called Under His Eye because in the story, the guards and the men held the power, and the women were more submissive, and they did pretty much whatever they were told to do. So this student may have decided to change the title, but yet keep the same concept. The next book I'm going to discuss is The 39 Clues, The Medusa Plot. That's by Gordon Korman. And the takeaway that we would hope students would take from this is to work on their prediction skills, because throughout the book, the characters are on this quest to solve this mystery. So they may be able to predict what's going to happen next in some cases. Inferencing is big, because sometimes it doesn't come right out and say what's going on. However, students can use their inferencing skills to discover that. Obviously, there's problem solving, so they're solving a mystery. They're gathering clues to try to help their families. Comprehension. There's also, interestingly enough, little game cards that are included with the 39 Clues books. So those help to reinforce comprehension, because you have to have read the book in order to play the game and remember the details. Sequencing is also something that students will work on while reading this book and doing activities. The text features, they have multiple uses of different fonts in this multimodal book. Here you can see the conversation up at the top, and then they have these text messages that come through, and they're written like this, and sometimes they use illustrations here, because like a character like Medusa, most students would be familiar with it, but some students would have a difficult time visualizing what a woman with snakes for her hair might look like. So the author has included a few pictures, not too many though. It's certainly not a graphic novel. And as I mentioned, we had the online game, or the online game for the cards that are included with the book. So that's kind of an interesting feature. The standards that are going to be covered in this book, students will be able to read carefully and determine explicit meaning of text. They'll be able to make logical inferences, and they'll also be able to cite specific textual evidence when writing and speaking in order to support conclusions drawn from the text. RL 3.1, they'll be able to answer questions to demonstrate understanding of text, referring explicitly to the text as a basis for the answer. RL 4.1, they'll be able to refer to details and examples in the text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. And finally, RL 5.1 says they'll be able to quote accurately from a text and when explaining what the text says, and explicitly when drawing inferences from a text. The alternative assessment that students could do for this would be to design a family tree representing the famous Cahill family. This would, I think, be extremely useful because these characters appear over and over and over in this series of books, and it would help tremendously for students to be able to keep those relationships clearly in their heads so that they understand the dynamics between the families, so that when they go on to read the next book and new characters are introduced, they would be able to rely on background knowledge of the relationships between the families and the characters. Students will gain an understanding into the complex plot of the story. There's lots of twists and turns in this book and in this series. So students are going to be able to understand the larger theme as well as some of the smaller things that are going on between characters in the book. And students will gain an understanding of character development and relationships in the book. Third book I read this week was Ask Me How I Got There by Christine Hepperman. Very interesting read. This book was written in free verse poems, which I was not familiar with. I had not read a book like this ever before. So I really did get into it, and I found myself just flipping through the pages. I mean, it really caught my attention. It will also work on students' inferencing skills, because while it is poems, there are inferences that students do have to make to successfully understand the book. Problem solving. Their main character is dealing with a teen pregnancy, and so there's lots of things that she has to do to handle that. And of course, comprehension. So some of the text features, the length. As you can see, some of these poems are shorter and some of them are longer. They use verses, free verses. There's handwriting excerpts in the book, and there's a variety of texts. So there's quite a variety in this book. Oops. It's not clicking. Okay. So, out of the 3 books, I think they all work on the same kind of standards. This book, again, pretty much the same as the other 2. They use different skills to help, or different. All right, finally, so all 3 of these books kind of work on the same standards, and there are alternative assessments that we can do for each one, which I think help students to be able to be creative and express themselves. So I hope you enjoyed this summary of what I read this week. Thanks so much.